Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. On my channel, I teach web development through realistic project builds, like this landing page. Today, we're going to build out this entire page from scratch using just HTML and Tailwind CSS. Now, the project is meant for absolute beginners to Tailwind, but I've tried to contain a lot of the basic instruction to a single section at the beginning of the video, so you can skip over it if you already have an understanding of how Tailwind works. Now let's walk through the project really briefly here, which is set up live on my Coding in Public site, where I host a lot of my larger projects. You'll see we've got some common design features like a header and several card sections. And then as you move towards the bottom of the page, we'll include some design features like the circle and floating divider. The form also includes some helpful UI improvements with floating labels. So as you focus on an input or add text, the labels move above the field so you always remember what goes in each input field. And that's not all. We'll also be adding dark mode at the same time, so the entire site will adjust based on the user's browser preference. With Tailwind, this is really easy, and I'll show you how to get started with it. The site is also fully responsive. On smaller screen sizes, the menu disappears and a button shows, which you can use to toggle the menu on or off. In addition to wrapping some sections on mobile, we'll also hide a few of the design elements to make for a cleaner look. So that's the project. It was a lot of fun to design and build out, and I hope it's going to be fun to go through with me. Now, I've structured the project into subsections so you can follow along as you have time. Below you'll find timestamps for everything, and if you ever get stuck, you can grab the completed code in the description. In this video, I'll give you a basic overview of how Tailwind works, show you how to set up the project using ViteJS and PostCSS, and then guide you step by step from the Navbar down through the bottom of the page. Each section is marked below, so you can jump in and out of the project. If you already understand Tailwind, for instance, you can skip past the explanation and go straight to the setup. While everyone learns differently, I'd encourage you to code along with me. Again, you can grab all the code from the GitHub link below, including the assets you'll need to code along. Finally, if you have suggested improvements, I have a community improvements branch meant for collaboration, so feel free to submit a pull request or leave a new issue if you have an idea for how to make this project better. We're all learning, and we're all better for it when we code together. All right, let's jump right in. All right, so I'm going to assume that you are brand new to Tailwind, maybe even don't even understand exactly what it does. Well, we're going to look at this real-life project in a second, but let's first of all run over here to the Tailwind docs. What you're going to see is that it's a low-level utility framework. And basically what we're going to be doing is adding classes, utility classes, to the HTML, and then they will style whatever is over here. This is the example they're giving you. So here they're saying, hey, I want the text to be this color unless it's dark mode, in which case make it this color. And as they're changing things, you're going to notice that everything is shifting and changing over here. So you can do things like text center, you can do media queries like medium. On medium, I want it to go to flex. You can do rounded things, again, scope to a specific viewport if you want to. And most of these things are intuitive if you already know how to write CSS. That's actually the first thing I want to point out, that Tailwind is really meant for somebody who already understands CSS. That's not to say you can't learn it if you don't know CSS, but I think you'll really only get the benefit of Tailwind like you would with any other real framework if you already understand the core language of CSS. So that's the first thing I want to encourage. The second thing to note is that Tailwind is really meant for tools that allow you to kind of iterate over data. Or in other words, things that you can build components in and then like pass props to and from. Because otherwise what you end up doing is just writing a bunch of this stuff everywhere all throughout. Now, we're actually not going to be using any kind of templating language. We're just going to write in plain HTML today. But we can go ahead and just grab all this and copy it down to another section. And that's what we're going to be doing a lot throughout this site. But if you're off-put by having to do all of this writing every single time you write out your HTML, just note that basically it's meant really more for templating languages where you can iterate through data and then just pass things to a component, and you only have to write these classes once. And then, for instance, anywhere you have a button anywhere on your site will all use the exact same syntax. The final thing I want to point out is how to customize Tailwind. Now, the nice thing about it being a utility framework is, unlike Bootstrap and other things that have a bunch of pre-built components, is that really, you can build anything you want. If you can design it and write it in CSS, you can design it and write it in Tailwind. Each individual class here references a single specific CSS property. That means that basically you have full control, as long as you understand CSS, to style this however you want. Now, in addition to that kind of customization, you can actually customize the config file so you can add your own colors, your own things, and overwrite or add to what Tailwind already provides. Let's say, for instance, that you're looking at their text large size, and if I hit Command K on a Mac, I'm not sure what this is on a Windows, or you can click into any of these search fields, but I'm just going to hit Command K. You can start searching. So we'll say text size, and here we go. It says font size. When I open this up, you'll see that I'm already scrolled down to the bottom for some reason, but when I come up top here, these are kind of they give you a bunch of default values, and they'll walk you through what these are up top. So on all of these docs, up top, they will show you whatever the default values are. So you've got access to extra small, small, base, large, extra large. So they tell you exactly what they correspond to over here on the right. Then they just tell you how to use it. They give you an example. And then they tell you how to combine it with other states like hover or focus or whatever. And then you can, again, scope things to different media query breakpoints like medium or large, and you can, again, customize all those. But on whatever doc you look at the very bottom, they have a section on customizing your theme. Now, when we set up our Tailwind project, like any Tailwind project, it needs to have a Tailwind config file, tailwind.config.js, and sometimes those will be named differently. The extension will be a little different depending on the framework you're using. But you can see here that what we've got is a theme object, and inside here we can customize this font size. So they've added tiny here, and then they've added a 7XL because normally it only goes up to 6XL. So for instance, let's say you said, hey, you know what, I like these default sizes. The only problem is I really want them to be clamp properties so that they're fully responsive typography. And so you can just come in here and overwrite these. That's totally fine. Now it's important to note that as you're customizing these files, if you do it directly in this theme like this, you're going to be overwriting anything that's already there unless you include it like they have here. So they've added all the original ones and then just added the ones they want. You can also choose to extend the items, and that would just be to add additional classes to whatever Tailwind already produces. Now, Tailwind comes with some great defaults, and in fact, not only do they just give you sizes and things like that, but they actually have some nice resets for everything. And like, for instance, your font sizes actually have line heights associated with them, but again, you can configure that if you want. Finally, if I come all the way down here, in addition to configuring the file, you can actually just have arbitrary values. So in other words, you can just write classes directly in line if you add brackets, and that actually will be compiled as if it were an actual Tailwind class. Now, it's not great to do this all the time. You'd actually end up basically writing a bunch of inline styles, and eventually that just becomes really hard to manage, and now you've got a problem on your hands that you created. So let's look at one other example, and we'll look at another font one, this font family. They give you some default font families up here you can see, but you may have your own that you really want to do. Well, you can come down here, and you can add additional ones like they show you here. Or if you want, you can actually extend it like I was telling you earlier. Then all you're doing here is saying, hey, I want to add this as my default, what I want, and then I'll just tack on the rest of their default sans after that. Now, you don't have to do this. You could just overwrite it in this way. But by extending it, you're not overwriting every other font family available within Tailwind. Now, because this is just CSS, you could actually come in here and write your own just CSS directly in here. Now, here they're actually showing you how to use the Tailwind syntax to do that, but you could actually write your own CSS. But I think if you're going to be using Tailwind, go all in, and only when you absolutely have to reach outside of that and write something else down this way. Now, before we jump in, let me just answer a few objections if you're brand new to Tailwind. Number one, you might be saying, hey, I kind of would rather have complete control and write all my own stuff rather than having to learn something on top of CSS, and I understand that. That's my preference, honestly, although I think Tailwind does help once you get the classes under your fingertips. It's really quick and easy to get something up and running because you're writing everything in a single file. Number two, you might be wondering about build size. Now, believe it or not, Tailwind is going to be way smaller than pretty much any custom code you do. I mean, just think about a normal page like this. You'd probably have a bunch of display grids, display grid over here, display grid here. So just with the display grid or display flex, all of these things here would have display grid or display flex on them. And in a CSS file, you're going to be declaring display grid, I don't know, hundreds of times. What if you just had one class that whenever it was referenced gave you display grid? So in other words, your CSS file only has to reference display grid one time, and suddenly it's available for you anywhere that you can just type display grid in your HTML. Because it's not doing some extra fetch to grab that from your CSS file itself is pretty small, and the browser is pretty quick at analyzing that HTML. In addition to that, you don't have to really worry about any kind of structuring of your CSS because basically everything is at the element level. You're not having classes that you're then overriding and all that kind of stuff. And in addition to that, you don't have to come up with random names for things on your page like card or card header or whatever. All you do is say like grid, gap 4, whatever. let me just show you how that actually works in practice. So if I open this up, you're going to see this is the project we will do. And you can see here we've got a bunch of classes that we've just added, and I've actually spaced them out like this because I think it's easier when you're learning to write it almost like CSS, just up and down like this, except on shorter ones, I just went ahead and did that. But you can see here we've got background amber, and backgrounds always start with that, and then the color, and then whatever variant you have. And again, you can customize those colors however you want, or extend the defaults in Tailwind and add them on top of that. In addition to that, you've got margin and padding. And margin, you see here, is an M, and then if you want left and right, you do X, and up and down is Y. If you want top, it's T. If you want bottom, it's B. Right is R, and left is L. So you just add these little extensions, and then you give it numbers. Now, so that you don't have to remember all of this, I'm going to show you an extension where basically you just type M, and it will give you all the examples that are available to you in Tailwind, telling you what the CSS values are as well. It's built on a system that scales, so once you kind of get that scaling down, it's pretty easy to keep track of what's going on. Another thing to note here is that this container class, if you're used to working with other frameworks, you might be used to that centering things, but remember, everything in Tailwind does one thing. So container is only going to set the width, and then if you want to center it, you have to use margin X, or left and right auto. You can see here that this means padding left and right 8, which is 2 rem in Tailwind. And then a lot of the other classes are things that you would naturally think of if you already know CSS, so like overflow-hidden. Finally, and then I promise we'll get to some code here, if you are using Tailwind 3.0, which has been out for a few months now and is the default now when you install it, you're going to notice something, and that is that no styles get compiled at all, except for the ones that you actually use. So in this case, you're going to see all the ones I've used down here below. So if you were using Tailwind 2 or earlier, your style sheet would have a ton of classes whether or not you actually use them in your project. And then you would have to use something like CSS Purge to get rid of those. Well, no longer. Just-in-time is built in by default now with Tailwind. That means only the classes you actually use ever get sent to your style sheet. So in this project, we will use some things for grid, so like grid column start 1, but we're not going to use grid column start 2, so it doesn't show up at all in our finished style sheet. Now you can further compress this if you want with some more tooling. I'm not going to show you how to do that. But one other thing to mention about this whole style sheet is up top, you've got a bunch of default resets that Tailwind includes automatically. And you see these up top here, they're just resetting a bunch of things that are kind of, the kinds of things that you would expect and need and have to usually add yourself. I hope that was a big help to understand kind of how Tailwind works and why you might want to use it if you're brand new to Tailwind. All right, let's go ahead and get this project all set up. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in with this installation process. If you click this Get Started, you'll see that there's a bunch of different options for installing this. You can just use the CLI. That's the quickest probably to get something up and running. But probably for most people, you're going to use something like PostCSS, or you can grab one of the framework guides that kind of walks you through how to use PostCSS with whatever framework you're using. In our case, we're going to use Vite, and they've got a guide for that, so let's go ahead and just use that. Now I'm going to use PNPM, but other than that, everything here will be the exact same. We're just going to walk through this together, and you're welcome to do this on your own and skip to the next section if you prefer. So I'll say PNPM init, Vite, and then let's give this a project name. I'm going to call mine Home Smart Landing Page. Now you can use Vite to get a bunch of different types of projects up and running. In our case, we're just going to write a little bit of vanilla JavaScript, so that should work just fine for us. Let's go ahead and CD into that. And now I'm going to install these dependencies right here. So we've got Tailwind itself, we've got PostCSS, which is the tooling that helps us process our Tailwind, and then Autoprefixer, which will provide backwards compatibility for older browsers. So I'm going to install all those, but before I hit enter, there's one more thing we're going to be using, which is this Tailwind's form plugin. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this as well and just add this to the end of the list. All right, we'll let all of those install, and I'll come back over this way. You'll see the next thing we need to do is actually get a Tailwind config.js file and a PostCSS config.js file. And if you use this command right here, it'll actually do both for you. So let's come down here, let's clear this out just so it's a little easier to see. And I'm going to do pnpx, or you can do npx if you want, that works. And this will install this. If you're interested in PNPM, I just did a video not too long ago on the channel. It's basically an alternative to NPM, but it works very much the same. All right, everything else we will actually be doing in the code itself. So let me get VS Code over here on the left, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so over here on the left, I've got VS Code. Let's go ahead and work on this Tailwind config file. I'm going to copy all of this right here and open up this Tailwind config file. That's what this command did right here, is it created both this and this PostCSS. Let's go ahead and add the content right here. And then the plugin we're using, this Forms plugin, also requires that we add this to the list right down here. So let's go ahead and just copy that and paste that in. Okay, so we should be good there. Let's come back here. So we've done step 3. Let's move to step 4, which is basically adding these directives in your CSS file. Now they say to create a new file, this index.css. I'm just going to use the style one that's already here. So I'll add that in right there. Because of that, it actually tells you, hey, make sure you add that new one to the JS file. The way that Vite works by default is it pulls in all your styling from your JavaScript file. So that's fine. We're not going to be writing a lot of JavaScript, but we will reference this file. So let's just keep it like that, and I'll erase any extra styling. All right, so let's come back over this way, and let me open up this index.html file, and then I'll open up the local terminal here, and let's just write pm run dev, or npm run dev works just fine if you want to use that. All right, so it's got it up and running on port 3000. So there it is right here. And it looks like everything is coming through just fine. So let's go ahead and change some stuff here. Let's add Home Smart to that. So now it actually shows up top there. And then let's get rid of this div. We don't need this anymore. And let's go ahead and just do some basic styling to make sure that Tailwind is actually working as expected. So I should be able to come in here and add a Tailwind class. And to add background colors, you just do BG and then a name of a color. So let's do like blue. And then there's different variations depending on the intensity of the blue you want or the lightness and darkness. So let's do something like 500 and it should come through. Okay, it does. So perfect. All right, now, like I mentioned, this should only compile the actual styles we end up using. So you can see here's a class right here and it's being compiled. Nothing else should be here. And if I scroll down, you see we've got a bunch of CSS variables that are used, but no classes have actually been rendered to the browser except for the one we actually used. So now we know things are working correctly. All right, I think it's time for us to build out the navigation. Before we start adding things for the navigation bar themselves, let's go ahead and start with some basic styling for the entire site. Now we'll do that by adding classes to our body. Typically with websites, it's nice to have a max width. So if somebody has a ultra wide screen or something that it actually fits properly. So we'll do max width. And if I come back over here to Tailwind, you can search for things with Command K on a Mac here. I'm not sure exactly what that is on Windows. I'm sure Windows people, maybe Control K, but you can come in here and just search for max width and it pulls right up. Now, as we scroll through all these different class options, you're going to see that the largest we've got here is this 1500 pixels. Well, I know that there will be normal screens that'll be wider than that. So let's just actually do our own arbitrary value here. This isn't great to do all the time in Tailwind, but for things like this that are kind of special use cases that you're only going to have once in your site, it makes sense just to write it right like this. It ends up basically acting like an inline style at this point because it's only going to be referenced right here. So we've saved that, and now it should cap itself to the middle. Now we can also make sure that it always stays in the middle of the screen and not just to those 2000 pixels by adding margin, and then left and right is X, and then we'll do dash auto. And again, to figure out what that is, you just come over here and do margin like this, and then it gives you different options. And you can see here you've got M for margin, and then maybe as you'd expect, especially if you have worked with other frameworks, X is left and right, Y is up and down, and then you've also got top, right, bottom, and left. And then you just give it a value. And so you see all these different values you've got as options all throughout, and you can scroll through all these, but eventually this gets kind of annoying. So let me actually show you something else as we get this whole thing set up. If I open up my extension options and I search for Tailwind, I've actually got this installed but not enabled, but you'll need to install it. It's the CSS IntelliSense. So I'll come in here and enable it here, and then let me close the sidebar and come back this way and actually show you how this might work. So let's say next we want to set a default text color for the entire site. So I just start with the keyword text, and immediately I'm starting to get options I can use in Tailwind. So if you do a dash and start to type a color I know, which is neutral, now I get a whole list of colors. And what I'm after is this 900. So you can see how much better that is than having to look up everything over here in the documentation constantly. Now, to be fair, if you're getting started with Tailwind, you're going to do a lot of looking stuff up in the docs, and that can be kind of frustrating. But eventually it makes it to where you can just very quickly spin up a landing page or a component, and it takes almost no work on your part. You're just typing classes as fast as they can come out of your fingers. All right, so next let's go ahead. We've set a default color for light mode. You can actually set dark mode values just with the keyword dark like that. So let's set this to text neutral 200. So immediately we've set both a light and dark mode text color. All right, now one thing that's helpful is when you're getting started, I typically have started by just typing these things out as if they were in CSS. It makes it a little bit more natural for me since I'm used to writing CSS kind of line by line. And even though it makes for messy HTML, you can clean that up later with some tooling if you want to. But at least for now, it's helpful to be able to kind of clearly see exactly what you're doing. So we've got the width set, the max, the margin set to auto, so it's always going to be in the middle. We've set the text for light and dark mode. Let's go ahead and set a background color. So I'll do background white, and that would be my light mode, obviously. And then for dark, let's do background neutral, and I'm going to do 7, let's do 800. All right, so let's go ahead and come over here to our Home Smart right here. This is the true one. This is the sample one from my site. But if I come over here and I change my machine here to dark mode, it should switch the background color, and it does. Now, we don't have any text yet to test that out, but at least we know that that basic query is working. All right, so we're going to call that done on the kind of global styling. Let's come in here, though, and start doing some stuff with our nav bar. Now, we'll just start with the nav element, and here I'm going to add some classes, and using Emmet, you can do this even quicker. So I'll do margin left and right auto, and then I'll do another dot here and do padding 4, which is 1 rem all the way around. And then I'll do a background amber 400, which is one of their default colors. So I save that. You should see it pop up top here, and that's what it does. The other thing is you can hover over these, and the IntelliSense tells you what they are. So even if you're typing them out with Emmet and you don't get to see the preview as you're typing, you can still see it by just hovering over that. Now, in this nav bar, let's kind of come back over here. We're going to have 3 basic areas. So we're going to have this right here, which is our logo. We will have this, which is a button, and then we'll have this, which is our menu items, essentially. And we will use the exact same markup for both mobile and desktop. We'll just change around the CSS so that they appear a little bit differently. Now, in this project, we do have several assets. We have this logo here. We've got some of these images down below. I'm going to go ahead and just add these in really quickly, and I'll add them in a folder called Assets over here up top, and then I'll be right back with you. All right, here it is, and if you want to grab these, go ahead and just grab them from the repo below if you want to follow along exactly with what I am doing. All right, so we've got that closed down. We're going to reference one of those here in a second, so that's why I wanted to go ahead and get it up and running. So you might remember I said there's 3 things, and we're going to put them all inside a div with the class of container. Now, if you're used to using other frameworks, sometimes containers in other frameworks actually center things. The container in Tailwind only sets the width of things. So you can see that by default on smaller screens, it's 100% width. And then basically that stays the same until you lock in at 1500 pixels. So it's basically a way of setting a max width for content. And then if you want it to be in the middle, you actually have to add the margin X, so left and right auto. And again, I'm just going to space these things down so you can see exactly what's going on. It's a little easier, hopefully, to follow that way. So by default, this is going to be display of flex, and you can do that with the keyword flex here in Tailwind. And then I want to align my items center, and that's just item center, and then justify between, and that is for justify content space between. Now we're not going to see that take effect here until we start to add other things in here. So let's go ahead and add, first of all, our link. This will just be back to the home page, and this is going to be our image. We're going to reference the assets here and our logo. We'll call this something like Home Smart Logo in the alt tag. And then let's add one more thing here before we start styling this. Let's add an ARIA label, and we'll just say something like go to homepage. All right, so there it is, and it pops in. It's a little bit large for my liking. Let's do a couple things. Let's go ahead and limit the size as it comes in. So we'll say width will be 200. All right, and then we're set there. Now let's go ahead and add some styling through classes. So I'm going to set a width to 48, which is 12 rem. You can see there in the IntelliSense. And then for media queries, just like we did dark up above, you can just declare sizes with medium, small, large, whatever, and they give you a list of these in the Tailwind docs. So for the medium width, we will do 64, which is 16 rem, and then for the large width, we'll do 72, which is 18 rem. So as I move, this should go from smaller to kind of medium to eventually large, and it will lock in at that size. So we're good there for the image. Let's add some classes here. Let's see right here for the link itself. Now we've got essentially 2 types of classes we need to add here. First of all, we're interested in kind of the focus state as we tab through the page. So that's one thing we need to think about. And then the other thing is what this should do on large screen sizes. So let's do those kind of one at a time. When it comes to focus state, if I move over here to the final product, and let's close this down, if I focus in on this, it should have a rounded outline here rather than the default kind of blue, ugly outline. So we're going to replace the default with our own custom outline. And that's pretty easy to do here in Tailwind. So I can come over here, and we're going to use this all throughout the site on any of our buttons. So once we declare this once, we can just copy and paste these styles down. So to start with, whenever we focus, we want there to be no outline, so outline of none. Now, to be fair, you should never do this unless you replace it with something, because the whole point is that it's easy to see when you're focused on something, and that's what we're going to do right now is replace that. So we'll say whenever there's a focus visible state, so whenever there's actually someone's tabbed to it, we want to add a ring of 4. A ring is how you declare a box shadow, essentially, a ringed box shadow around an element, and it's meant for focusing things in Tailwind. So we'll say on focus visible, we want ring 4. Now, we want the ring itself to always be our color of neutral 900. Now, that won't matter until it's focused because the color won't be visible until the ring is visible. We do want it to be rounded, so this is a way of adding a border radius to something, and we'll do small. If I save it there and I come over here and focus on it, you can see that there's not a lot of room between the actual image and the border, so we can add a little spacing there with a ring offset. So I'll do ring offset of 4, and that should get it a little bit away from it. Now, though, you'll see that I've got this white outline in the middle, and that's the default for these box shadows, the way that they're built out. But you can change that color. So we'll say ring offset, and then we'll just give it a new color, and it will be the same as our background. So essentially, it looks like it's transparent. So if I come in here now and I focus, there it is. That's our finished state. We're going to use that a lot all throughout the project with other buttons. So let me kind of leave that alone. It'll be its own little section that we will copy and paste down throughout. So that's the first thing we had to do. The second thing we had to do is decide how to position this on larger screen sizes. So to declare larger screen sizes, we'll just do LG like that, and then we're going to call this absolute. So we want it to be positioned absolute once we get to large screen sizes. It's going to pull and kind of be in the middle center of the page. So to get it into the middle, let's go ahead and set the left property to 1/2, which is the same as saying 50%. You can see right there. Then we need to translate it, and if you're familiar with kind of how to position stuff absolute, this will be very familiar to you. We're going to position it in the left direction, and it will again be 1/2. Now you can see here that what I've done is I've just added this little minus sign up top, which makes it go negative 1/2. All right, so that's the nice thing. This would be positive 1/2, and this is negative 1/2, and you can do that with a lot of properties in Tailwind. All right, then finally let's set it off the top just a bit to top of 9, so 2.25 rem, and then to make sure it's always on top of everything, I'll set it at Z50. All right, so that's my Z index of 50. So as if I get a little bit bigger, it should snap to the middle, and that's what it does. It's positioned absolute now, and then we will be able to style those other buttons back here behind it. All right, so we've got the logo done. Let's go ahead and work on the next thing. You might remember we had 3 things: the logo, the button over here, and then the nav items. So for the button, we're going to use a hero icon, which this is created by the makers of Tailwind. Let's just look for a menu. I'm going to copy out this SVG. That's what we'll be using right here when we're styling this. All right, so let's come back over here, and we're going to make this a button itself. We'll give it an ID of menu so we can reference that in the JavaScript. And then right inside here is where we're going to paste in that SVG. Now, because it's made by Tailwind, they already include some classes for you by default. I actually want to change these just slightly to be slightly bigger, so let's change both of those to H8 and W8, which is width and height of 8. All right, and then next, let's come up here and add some classes to our button. Now, probably the most important one to add here is that on large screen sizes, we want this to be hidden because that's when we're going to be showing the menu. So it should actually stop showing when this moves to the middle. Good. All right, next, we actually want a lot of these same things right up here. So let's just copy all this down, and let's just paste it in right here. And now when I come here and I hover over it, it should have, or focus on it, should have that same styling. Now, I do want to add one more thing, which is a hover state. So let's come in here, and I'm going to make sure that the text, because this is set to current color, it'll pick up whatever text this button is. So let's make sure this text is set correctly. So we'll say text neutral, we're looking for 900. And then on the hover state here, I'm going to do text neutral here. Let's do 600. And now if I come over here and I hover, it should actually switch between those. Now there's no transition state right now, so a way you can add a transition state is just transition, and then there's a bunch of different options. In our case, we're changing the color, so we can add that, and it has some default timing and stuff like that. So now it's a little bit more gradual as you hover. Now we could do the same thing actually for that logo if you want to as well. Because it's not actually in the document itself, it's being referenced or loaded separately. The best way to do this is probably just to change the color of or to change the opacity on hover. So let's set the hover opacity to like, I don't know, let's do 7.5, something like that. And then we'll do a transition. And in this case, we're going to do transition opacity. So now if I come over here, this should just fade in and out, and it looks pretty similar to what this ends up being. Okay, cool. So we've got those set. We've got 2 of our 3 things. The final thing then would be our nav items. So we're going to put that all inside a div here, and we'll give this a role of menu bar. So this will tell assistive technology and other things that this is where our menu items are held. Now, so that we can see where things are going to be styled here, let's go ahead and add a link here, and we'll point this to the home page, and we'll give this a role as well. So we'll give this a role of menu item, and we'll call this home. All right, now just so we can see what's going on, let's copy this down a few times, and you can see it shows up right there. Let's go ahead and add some classes to the holder, the container here, so we can see how we want this to be styled. Now, again, because Tailwind is mobile first, we need to be thinking mobile first and then move to larger sizes like we did with the icon and the menu hamburger button. So normally, by default, this is going to be hidden until we click that button. So it'll be display of none, which is the class of hidden in Tailwind. Let's not put that on just so we can actually see what's going on, because the other thing we're going to be toggling on is this class of flex. So I'm going to start with that. We'll remove that in a little bit. So I'll go ahead and add that, and you see they now stack up next to each other. And on mobile here, we also want it to be flex col, which is our flex column direction, and now they should stack up and down. And let's give it this some gap between them. We'll do 1 rem between, which is the gap of 4. On mobile as well, this is going to be position of absolute. And we'll set the right at 0 and the left at 0 so that they stay kind of against the sides of the screen. And for my top, I will do 16, which is 4 rem, and that should get it just below where the navbar is. Now it is going to need some background color, so let's do background amber 400, which should be the same as our menu bar, so that should blend in nicely. Next, I want a shadow below it, so let's do shadow extra large here, and that gives you a nice little kind of depth of field. Let's do a few other things with the text. So we're going to put everything in the center with text center, which is text align center. We'll put some padding around the entire thing. Let's do padding 6, and then I'll set my text to large. Maybe let's move that up next to the center. Okay, so there they are, showing all stacked up like we want them. Now there's one more thing we need to add, but in order to see why we need to add it, I need to actually style out these menu items. So let's do this. Let's actually get rid of everything but one and just add all the classes in one, and then we'll copy everything down. Again, if you're using a framework, that will actually allow you to kind of iterate through items. This is even easier because you're literally doing what we're doing here just in your loop. Let's first of all start with some padding. So we'll go up and down the Y direction here. We just want a little bit of padding, and then we're going to do left and right here, padding of 6. If I save it there, you can see everything taking effect. I remove those other items, and then you get some extra padding. Now when I go to dark mode here, the default color is actually to turn all the text white. In this case, I don't want that for my menu bar, so I can override that here with this more specific style on the link itself. So let's set a dark to our text, neutral of 900. Now just like with the menu bar item, I also want to have a hover state on this, and I'm actually going to use the same hover state we have up top. In addition to that, I'm going to use all the same focus states as well. So that means I can just copy down all of this right here, and we can add all of that down here. Now if I come in here, I should be able to hover over it, and if I start clicking, there it is, or using the tab button, it shows just like you'd expect. Okay, so cool. So that's actually all we're going to need to do on this link. Now let me copy this down 3 times and add our different wording for each of the menu items, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so all I did was change out the wording here for contact, login, and sign up. Other than that, I just copied everything straight down. Now, if we look at the finished product here, you're going to see that this one has its own little styling to it. So let's change a couple things in this final one here. To start with, it's going to have a little bit more padding to it, and then it does need its own background color. So let's go ahead and add a background, and we're going to use a teal variation, and we'll use the 900 version. Now you can also see that it needs a different text color. We're actually going to remove this dark value and just have a text of white all the time. That also means that I can remove this text neutral down here. I think that was one of those styles that we copied down, which means we could remove all of those up top here too. So maybe let's do that quickly. Unlike the menu button, these things already have this from the default styling, so let's get rid of that there. All right, and this final one's down here again. We've got a few more things to do. We're going to change this to a rounded of medium to give it a little bit more rounding. And then let's jump back up here above the focus states here, and I want to add a couple other things. So first of all, I want a shadow, and we'll do an extra large shadow. And then I want to change that on hover. So I want to be able to come over here and I want it to go off. I also need to get rid of that hover state as well. So let's kill this hover state here, come back up here, and we'll say on hover, we want a shadow of none. And then to make that a calmer transition, let's do transition, and we'll look at the shadow option. And here we go. So now I should be able to come in here and it just pulls off nicely. Okay, cool. So we should have all that set. The last thing was we need to actually move this to the middle. And I'm also seeing here the IntelliSense is telling me that I've got two different transition properties on. So let's remove that other one for colors because we don't need that one anymore. Okay, cool. So let's do something on the parent to keep everything in the center. So come back up here. The last thing we need to add here for the mobile version would be align items center, which is items center. And now everything should be stacked up. This is because we're in a column direction. That item center is what's doing it on this axis. All right, so we've got that mostly set. Let me actually pull out. What we want to do now is style it on the desktop. So let's get this just wide enough, maybe zoom out a touch so that it shows properly. And then let's make a few adjustments just on this menu bar for when we get into our large viewport. So first of all, we're going to have large. Every time we move to the large viewport, we always want to add flex back in. Now, normally this would have a hidden class on it, which is display none, but in large, we want this to be flex. Next, I want it to go back to the direction of row. So let's add flex row in there. And then I also want to go ahead and move from absolute to a static position. Now you can see it shows up just as you'd expect, right in line where it's supposed to be. Now we do have that nasty shadow on it that we don't need anymore. So we'll say shadow none here when we're on large viewports. And then let's go ahead and justify the content space between. For that to go all the way across, it needs to have 100% width on it, so we can do a width of full. Now the only other thing we need to do is actually add some spacing in between these. Now this is position absolute, and it won't show till it's on this size. So as long as we have some space right here, everything should look good. So let's actually come down here to the link, the second link here, and we're going to add a margin right auto. Now we'll take all the extra space and smash it in the middle there, and now everything looks as it's expected to look. So that's on large, and this is on mobile. Oh, and that also needs to be only on the large screens. Okay, cool. So that should show properly for us there. Great. Now let's go ahead and add the HTML or the JavaScript, but to do that, I need to come back up here and add in a class of hidden. So now it should hide by default, and just when we click on this button, we're going to activate it with JavaScript. So let me come over here, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in. And I'll just walk you through briefly what this does, but you can see that it's looking at the ID of menu, which is our button right here, and then it's looking at our menu bar, which is all those items. And what it's basically asking is every time we click it, it's saying, hey, is it expanded? Does it have this ARIA expanded, true or false on it? So that means we need to make sure that we've got that set on this button itself. So let's come in here and we'll say ARIA expanded, and we'll set this to false to start with. While we're here, we should also add an ARIA label. This will say something like open menu. So if we come back over here to my JavaScript, what it's saying is, hey, does it have this ARIA expanded? Is it equal to true or false? And then just basically set the ARIA expanded attribute on that button to whatever the opposite of it is. So if it's true, make it false. If it's false, make it true. Secondly, just toggle these every single time. And if you're toggling both of them, then it'll basically switch between hidden and flex. So if I come in here, this should work. I click, it opens, it closes. If we were to inspect it, you also are going to notice that this button, if I can see this here, right here, this ARIA expanded true should switch between true and false as we click, and that's what it does. So this is telling screen readers and other assistive technology, hey, this menu is open or it's closed. Okay, cool. So we've got all that set, and now if we pull out, it should switch automatically on desktop view to that larger size. All right, so I'm going to call that good for the navbar. Next, we're going to work on the header section, which is all of this right here. All right, now this header section won't take nearly as long. We're going to put this all in a header tag, and we'll come in here and add classes in a little bit. But next, we're going to have a div, which will just be the background area. You can see here that it's not going to the very end, and we're going to use position absolute to get that to happen. So let's just add a div here, and we'll come back to that. That's our background div. And then we'll have a container that will hold the other two items. These items are our image. So we'll look at our assets, and we're going to look at our couch. We'll call this couch because that's what it is. And then I'll come in here and image and assets, and we're going to look at our app, and this is our app. All right, so that's all the markup we're going to actually need. Now we need to style this appropriately. So the first thing, let's go ahead and let's just work on this background color, I guess. So we'll give this a class here. And to start with, this is going to need to be absolute, to be positioned to absolute. We'll use the inset property, which is left, right, top, and bottom, all of them, all the way around, just like that. And then we'll overwrite just the bottom one here with a bottom of 8. What that should do is pull it up. I think it's 2 rem off the bottom on small screen sizes. Now, as we move up, we're going to change this value. So we'll go from 8 to 24 at the medium size, and then at extra large, we'll do the same thing, but we'll do it at 32. To make sure this is always behind everything, let's do a negative z index, and we'll do negative z of 10. And then I need to give this a background gradient, so I can do 2 bottom, just like that. And then we need to declare 2 values, the top value, so from amber 400, which is the same as our menu bar section, to amber, and we'll do 600. If we did all that correctly and I come back over this way, we should see that it's showing up right here. And right now it's positioned relative to the entire viewport, but we're going to change that just to be the header area. So let's go ahead and add some classes up here. And let's just do this inline right here without all the spacing because it's not too much. So we want a padding top of 16. That's the same height as our navbar, you might remember. It just gives it a little bit more spacing on mobile. And then on medium, we'll change this to 24. And on large, we'll change this to 48. All right, so that's actually all we're going to do when it comes to the header classes. Now it's just a matter of spacing out these things properly. This container class just holds things to a certain size, but it doesn't put things in the middle, you might remember. So we want margin left and right here to our auto. And this, let's go ahead and space this down because we're going to have a few classes we're adding here. I do want this to be a grid, and we'll set this to grid rows, and we're looking at grid rows 1. Now, you can't quite see that, but it's repeat. Here, let's hover over this now. All right, so it's repeat 1, min, max, 1 fraction. So what it's doing is it's declaring 1 row, and we're going to use that to basically position these 2 sub items within it. I want to make sure that any items inside this grid container are set to the end or the bottom. And then I do want to set a little bit of padding left and right just to make sure that things don't go all the way to the extremes. All right, now what I need to do is make sure that both of these are positioned exactly where I want them, and they're going to share a lot of the same properties. So let's go ahead and just do them together. You can do that with doing command and then clicking, or option and clicking, I think it is. And here we go. So we're going to start them both on row start 1. You can see that's the same as writing grid row start 1. Then I also want them to all end on row 2. If I save it there, they stack up, and now they decide, oh, okay, we'll put them on the same row, but we'll separate them on columns. Well, I don't want that either. So let's just do the same thing for the columns. So I'll say call start 1, and then call end 2. Lastly, let's make sure that these are in the middle. And let's see, we could do align item center. Let's just do MX auto. That should work as well. All right, now the app itself I actually want to change as we get to larger screen sizes. The couch can just kind of flex as the screen flexes, but let's come down here and add a few special things just for the app. So for the small screen size, I want it to actually have a width of 40, which is 160 pixels. And then as we get larger, we'll change that screen size. So at small, we'll do a width of 52. At medium, we'll do a width of 64. And at large, we'll do a width of 72. All right, so as I expand this, it should go from small to a little larger to then locking in at that 72 width. All right, so that is all we're doing for a header section. Let's next move to the cards. All right, so far we've done the header section. Now we're going to move to everything else down below, and all of this will live, or most of it at least, will live in a main tag. So let's go ahead and add that here, and we'll use this to space things out as the grid parent. So that means this needs to have a class here, and we're going to add a few things. So first of all, we'll have grid, and that declares it as display of grid. We'll set a gap of 12, that's for mobile. For small, we'll set a gap of 16. And then we're basically just going to iterate out on this as we move up. So for medium here, we're going to set this to 24. And then for large, we're going to set this to 32. Next, let's set a padding left and right of 2 rem. This is on the parent, that main tag itself. And then we'll set overflow to hidden. This will allow us to hide things like some of our position absolute circles down below in the design. All right, that sets up for all these other sections down here. And we've got this button, first of all, that we're going to work on. And then you'll see that we'll work on this section and this section. So let's go ahead and work on those cards. So let's add a link tag here. And right now we'll just have it point nowhere because, well, it doesn't do anything. We're going to have 2 things in here. We'll have the SVG, that little download button, and we'll also have some text. So inside our text, this span here, we're just going to say download the app, and then we're going to add an icon from Hero Icons. So come over here and search for download, And there it is. And I think we're actually going to use this just as written. So it actually includes the width and height for us, and that's what we want it to be, 24 pixels either size, width and height. That means all we need to do is come in here and add some classes here. So let's do that, and let's pull up the actual page we're working on right here. And I've already got a very similar button actually in my nav area. If I come up here and I open this, you can't quite see it because all this is over it. So that tells me we also need to add something on our nav to make sure that that's over everything. So let's do that so I can show you what I was trying to show you. So if I come up here to our menu bar, let's add on here Z40 or something like that. Okay, so now this should stay over the top. Okay, there we go. So this is the button we're looking at. And basically, aside from the color, a lot of that is going to be very, very similar. So let's copy down all of this right here, and we'll just paste it in down below. All right, so if I save that, that mostly works. Let's change around a few things. First of all, this needs to be amber 400. Again, that's the same as most of that yellow color around the site. And then I'm going to remove this text white because I obviously want it to be the same as the default dark color. And I want to make sure that that stays even when I switch to dark mode. So let's set this back to neutral of 900. Now let's do a few other positioning things just for this button. So first of all, we want it to be in the middle. So we'll do left and right auto. And then I want it to have some margin up and down. Now, although the main tag has some kind of spacing elements here for all the children, this one I want to actually set off from the top and give it a little bit more space than normal from the bottom. And then finally, let's set this to flex, and then we'll do a gap of 2. And that should space out though, so it looks great. So if I save this here and then come over here, we should also get all that default styling showing up there, which is great. Now you'll see here that I'm actually getting that yellow color around. I can change that if I want. So like this offset color, I could set this to white. And now it should show a white border as I come down here. I could also set it to transparent if I want as well. And that should give it kind of that full black color all the way around. I think I prefer it on white. We could actually set this maybe on the dark mode. So let's do that. Let's say dark. And this would need to be our offset neutral. Let's see, what was that? 800, I think is what we set the entire dark mode to. So now on dark mode, let's see, light mode's like that. Dark mode, if I switch my machine, should look like this. All right, so that's kind of hard to see. So let's do this. Maybe let's change the ring color itself on dark. So let's set this to ring amber 400. So now on dark, it should look like that. Okay, so that works for me. All right, so that should be our button mostly done, I think. So let's come down here and let's go ahead and add that card section below. So if I move to our final version over this way, you're going to see that we've got 3 cards stacking up, and then we've also got these dots that show up on larger screen sizes. So let's first of all just worry about getting these set up, and then we'll worry about the dots after that. So we're going to be inside of our main tag just below that button, and let's add a section here. We'll give it a class of relative so that some position absolute things like those dots will be positioned relative to this container. Also, we need to add an aria labeled by, and we'll just call this thing qualities. Now, even though I don't have a heading, to make sure that this is lane marked, I'm going to go ahead and add that ID of qualities here, and then we'll say our qualities. We'll give this a class of screen reader only. Basically, it's going to hide it from the UI, but it will allow screen readers and Google itself to actually see what this section is all about. These cards will live inside of a container, this div of container, and let's go ahead and build out one card, and then we'll come back in and add those classes. So each of these cards will be inside a grid parent. We'll add some more classes here in a second. And then we will have a div. This is going to hold our image. And I'm going to grab all of these again from our hero icons. So let's come in here, and I think I'm looking for like lock or something like that. Yeah, here we go. So let's copy and paste that in. And while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and change 2 things here. We're going to make these larger, so we'll do 24, but everything else should stay the same. Now below this image, which is being held inside this div, we'll have an H3 here, and this will say safe. We're having this as an H3 because the section has an H2, so these are like the sub items within it. And then here I'll just paste in our products are secure, private, out of the box. All right, so there it is showing up as we'd expect. Let's go ahead and style this out, and then we'll just copy it down and change out some of these icons and text. So let's start with this container right here. This is the thing that holds all 3 cards. In addition to the container class, I need to give it a margin auto. You'll remember that. Next, I actually want to set a max width on this as well. We'll set it to 5XL. And these cards we're going to position flex so they're next to each other. We'll give them a gap of 12 between them, and then flex wrap so that they wrap correctly on mobile. I want to make sure that when they're on desktop that they always start at the top. And then I want to justify them center. This would be on mobile. And on medium, we want to justify between. So that means on mobile, they should be stacked in the middle. And as we were to add more, they'll justify between, so they'll space out as much as they can. Next, let's come in here. This is to the card itself. In addition to being a grid parent, let's give it a gap of 4, so each of the items are gapped by 4. And then we'll justify items center here. I want all my text to be in the center, and then I want on medium for this to be a flex of 1. So as a flex child, I want it to have flex 1. You can see there, basically what that does is add flex row to it, and then it will space it out evenly with other things with this same class, which will be all of our other cards. All right, cool. So we've got that set. Let's come down here to our div that holds the image. We're going to add a few things here. First of all, I want this to be rounded full. So I want it to be a full circle, and then we'll set a border here to 8. So 8 pixels all the way around, and then we'll set the color by saying border amber 400. I do want it to have some more padding, so let's do padding of 4, and that spaces that out just like we'd want. All right, I think that leaves styling just for these sections down here, just the text. So let's come in here. Let's just do this inline. We don't need to space this out because we're just adding text, 3XL, and then font bold. All right, so we should be set. So that should look the same as what we've got going on over here. The icon does look quite a bit bigger, and I think this is supposed to be 14. So let me change both of those. Okay, there we go. And we might actually be zoomed out a bit. Yeah. Okay, so that should look the same as our final product, and it does. All right, so let's copy these down, and I'm going to go ahead and grab this text here so we can just copy this in. And this is just a clipboard manager I used called PasteBot, and I think I've done a video on it before if you want to check that out. All right, this will allow us to just sequentially paste these items as we go. So let's see, let's copy this down 1, 2 times, and then we'll change out some text here. So, all right, which I think leaves just the icons. So if I come back over here, yep, just changing out the icons. Everything else should work. And as we get larger, eventually they'll justify content space between, and then they should lock at that 5XL, which they do. Okay, cool. So let's come back up here to our hero icons and search for 2 other icons. The first one is like a bolt, I think. So let's copy this in and move back up here. And I'm going to go ahead and do these both and just change these to height and width of 14 and be right back with you. All right, so those should be good to go. And the second one is called badge check. So if you want to grab that, you're welcome to. And here we go. All of them look great. Okay, cool. The last thing we need to do for this is add those dots on the left and right. As you can see, when we get on larger screen sizes here, they pop in over here on the side. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to come up here and let's see, where do we add that section? So right below this section here, we're going to add 2 images, and they'll both point to assets. And then we've got, let's see, assets dots. There we go. We can say dots. That's fine. We're going to hide this anyhow. So we'll say aria hidden equals true. This isn't really important. It's just kind of decorative. And then let's add some classes here. So I'm going to just do it for the first one, and then we'll copy this down and change 1 or 2 things. So by default, they'll be hidden, so they won't show on mobile. But then when we get to large, we want them to be block. At that time too, we will make sure that they're position absolute. We'll set the top to 1/2, so halfway down the section itself, and then we need to translate that. So we'll say translate and negative, in the negative y direction 1/2. And then this first one will be negative left 24. And on extra screen sizes, extra large screen sizes, we'll change that to negative left of 7. Now we should be able to just copy all of this down here, this image itself, and we'll change out just basically all the lefts to rights. So I'll grab both of these and change them to rights. And now if I get this a little bit bigger, they should pop in eventually. This is that negative 24, and then I get to extra large screen sizes, and it pops in a little bit better. So I want it to have a little more spacing here, and then it should look normal when you get on larger screen sizes. All right, so we've got that set. Next, we're going to work on the client section with those little cards down below. All right, so this is the section we need to work on now, this Our Partners section down here. We're going to add this text up top and then these cards that will adjust as the screen size adjusts. All right, so let's go ahead and add that section here, and we'll add an aria labeled by, and this will be pointing to an ID of partners, which will be the ID on our H2. Let's go ahead and do the rest of this just inline here with Emmet. So we'll do text center. So for text align center, we'll do a grid. We'll do a gap of 8 and then place items center. All right, so that's set and ready to go. And the next thing we have to do is work on this kind of top section right here. So we want this to be its own little section and then this to be its own section. So we'll put this inside of a div that is grid with gap of 4. And we'll have an H2 in here with that ID of partners like we have up above. And I'm just going to add our partners in the middle here. And then let's add some classes. We didn't actually style the H2 above since we hid it from everything but screen readers. But let's set this to text 4XL. We'll set a font of bold on here and then text amber 400, which is the same as that yellow color mostly all throughout the site. All right, just below here we will have a paragraph. Here we want it to always be 100% width, but we want to max it out at large size. Now let me paste that in here, and then let's hover over this. You can see that that's 32 rem, so that's as large as I want it to get, and so it should cap itself to the center. All right, the next section then are these icons down this way. So we're going to put this all inside of a div with the class of flex, and then we want flex wrap so that they can wrap properly on mobile. We'll justify them center. That will be for mobile or desktop, and give them a gap of 8. When we get to medium screen sizes, I want to change that gap to left and right. I want to change it to 16. So up and down or left and right will always have a gap of 8 unless we get to medium screen sizes, and in that case, left and right, it'll change and be a little bit larger. Next, I want this entire section to have a max width of 2XL, and I want to make sure it's always in the middle with margin auto. All right, so I know I'm going a little fast now, but now that we're halfway down the page, hopefully you're more familiar with a lot of these things and you can type them out with me a little bit quicker. Now what we need to do is add inside of here for each of these images, we're going to add a div that they sit inside. So let's go ahead and just do the first one, and then we'll end up copying this down. So I'm going to have a div with a padding 4 all the way around. I want to make sure that the background is white, but on dark mode, I want to make sure that we switch to background neutral, and we'll switch to that 600 color. I want to have a shadow of medium, but on dark mode, once again, I'm going to change this to shadow of XL. And then finally, I want to make sure that they're rounded at the medium size. And inside here, I'm going to have an image tag, and we'll set this to assets, and then partner 1 SVG. We'll just set this to partner. I don't remember what these things were called. And then we'll have a class here of H16 and width 16, so height and width of 16. Now I grabbed all these icons from a site called Simple Icons. I just randomly grabbed brands. I don't even know what these brands are in most cases. So you can use whatever ones you want from there if you want to. That's the finished one. Here's the one we've gotten. It's just down that way. So now what we can do is just go ahead and copy this down a bunch of times. So I think I've got a total of 7. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then let me show you a quick way to kind of switch things out. So I've got my 1 right here. Let's go ahead and just grab this, and I'll hit Command-Shift-L, and that will select every instance on the page. I'm going to thumb over here and then remove those all, and I've got an extension called Text Pastry right up there, and if I just hit Enter on the 1 to X, it will actually add 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way anywhere on my text insertions. So now they should all show up just like that because I've got them named in my assets folder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can see how even if you don't have a templating language that you're working with, if you can use a few shortcuts, you can pretty quickly get Tailwind working for you without having to retype all this multiple times. So that should work on mobile, and then when we get larger, it should lock in. And because we've set a max width on this, we'll make sure that we only ever have 4 up top and 3 down below. All right, that leaves our next section, which if I move back over here to our finished product, is this section right here. Now this has a little bit more complexity to it. You can see we've got that circle that pops in. We've got some position absolute things showing up here. So this section right here is what we will work on next. Okay, so you know the drill at this point. For our section, we're going to have an aria labeled by, and we'll point this to an ID of home. And then this will just be a relative container because we're going to have some position absolute things inside of here. Now we're going to have some stacking divs here just to get everything to line up properly. And kind of the outer wrapper here will be a div with the class of flex, and then we'll have flex wrap reverse. We're going to have this wrap reverse because this image needs to come up top even though it'll be on the right on desktop. And we'll have a gap of 8. And finally justify center. Now we're basically going to have 2 things in here. We'll have a div, first of all, and then we'll also have our image. So let's go ahead and put our image in there. This will just be assets, and then we're looking for our, let's see, table, I think. Yeah, there we go. And let's call this table because that's what it is. And we actually don't need any classes on that image at all. Everything else will be inside this div, and this is going to be all this text right here. So we'll start here by giving this a class of flex, and then we will flex wrap this and set it to flex direction of columns. We want it to start at the top so that it doesn't stretch out, so we'll do items start. And then for large screen sizes, we want it to justify center. And finally, we want a gap between these. Let's put this up top here. We'll do gap of 6. All right, so that should space out basically this section from this section and leave a gap of 6 and make sure that everything is responsive as we'd expect. Inside of here, then we'll have two sections. We'll have another div that'll hold the two areas of text, and then we'll also have our button down below. Now we've actually got a very similar button up top. If we look up here, let's see, this download the app. So let's search for that, download the app, and we can basically copy this out, right, like this, and let's put it all the way down here. If I save that and we move back over here, you're going to see a couple things we need to change on here. First of all, I can get rid of this SVG entirely. We don't need that anymore. I can also get rid of that span tag and that span tag. And then we may need to make a couple other changes once I add in this text, but let's start with that. So let's add in the text now. So this will have a class here, this div that's holding all these. We'll set this to flex, and then we'll have this flex wrap, and then we'll change the direction to column. Items start, and we'll give it a gap of 2, so a smaller gap between the text items. Inside here, we've got an H2. This will have our text 4XL, the same as up above, except we won't be changing the color. We'll just change it to font bold. Inside here, we'll have relax your home, and then we'll have a paragraph tag here with a class of max width medium. So it never gets larger than that. And inside here, we'll have all that text. And this max width medium just sets to 28 rem at the largest. So now if I come in here, this should all look correct. And here we go. I've got one thing that's messed up here. You can see that I've got some additional padding and that this button is trying to be positioned in the middle. That's because of some classes we added up top, this max width auto and then the Y12. So now that should look correct as we move it. It should flip over there and that works correctly. Now we set this to justify center here on large so that it stays in the center of this image. But other than that, it will be kind of stuck to the top as you'd expect. Right, so that's all the basic things in this section. We do have some kind of oddities when it comes to the absolute positioned things. So if I come in here, you can see we've got this bar, and then if we get to larger screen sizes, the circle changes, and then this green area kind of moves up underneath. So we're going to come down here at the bottom of our section outside of this div container that's holding the text and the images. We're going to add a few other things. We're going to first of all have a div, and this will be our circle, and we'll have a div, and this will be our border. Now, because these are both divs, we're just going to be adding classes to them and styling them just with CSS. So let's first of all work on the circle itself. This will be position of absolute, and then we will set it to a negative bottom of 6, which is 1.5 rem. I want this to always be below everything, so let's set a z-index, a negative z-index of 10 on this. And then let's come up top here and also do negative right here, and we'll do 32, which is negative 8 rem. Now, I always want to make sure that this is square, so there's actually an aspect ratio thing you can use called aspect ratio square, which just sets it to 1/1. Basically, I want this thing to be invisible until we get to medium screen sizes. So what I'm going to do is just on medium screen sizes, let's move some of these things around. On medium screen sizes, I will have a border of 8 show up. Let's come over here so we can actually see what we're doing on our project. So we'll set that to a border of 8, and then we'll set the border color to border amber 400. To make sure it's a circle, we want rounded of full here. And now it's still not showing because I haven't given it a width. So let's set a width of 64 pixels. So let's do that and get to a medium screen size, and we should see it come in. There we go, right over that way. Now we want to change the size of this circle as we get to larger screen sizes. So we'll just change that by saying, well, let's grab the large media query and set this to 96. For the extra large one, we want this to be width of 500. So let's look, we've got large, that gives us 512. Let's go ahead and zoom out and kind of get larger and larger, and it should just continue to increase until we get to the largest screen size possible. And you see kind of snapping down, and then once we get below medium, all these sizes are gone, so it basically disappears. So that's our circle mostly done. Let's come in here now to our kind of green banner area. And here I want this to have a background of teal of 900, and this should show automatically by default once we get some height and width on this. So let's set a height of 24, and it's in the DOM, so there it is right there. Now, because the main tag has padding left and right, we actually need to do some kind of negative margin just to get things to work properly here. So I'll do a negative margin of 8, which is the same padding I had on the main tag. Next, just because of the way I have it here, let's go ahead and just add a margin top rather than using the parent container of 12, and that spaces it out properly from the top section. And now let's think about different media queries we might need. So when I get to the extra large screen size, I actually want to change this height to be a little bit larger. So we'll change it to 48. Now, that's also the point at which I want to change this to be position of absolute. So I'll do extra large absolute, which means once we get to that screen size, it should pull out of the flow of the document and Let's see if we can get there right there. Okay, so it actually pulls completely out of everything. So let's come in here and zoom out so we can see what we're doing. All right, there we go. All right, now when it's at this screen size, we want to make sure at this point that it has a width of screen, so the full width of the screen. And then we also want to set it to a negative bottom of 8. At this point as well, we also want it to be negative Z10, so it'll be behind everything, and there it shows up. Now, this one and this one and this one don't technically need to be in this media query because they just won't take any effect. I guess this width one would, but it's not going to hurt anything since we already have this negative margin on either way. So let's just leave just this one for the media query. And then I can actually remove this margin top on extra large as well. So we'll do margin top of 0. All right, so as I get smaller, it just snaps in the normal kind of position of the DOM. As I get larger, now it kind of folds out that way. All right, so we'll call that section complete. And as we zoom back in, now you can actually see what it's supposed to look like on smaller screen sizes. It snaps in, and then when we get all the way out here kind of everything positions as you might expect. All right, that means we just have our form section, and we are going to call this project done. Let's jump in. All right, so we've got to the final section here, and we've got quite a bit of work left because we've got some fun things we're going to do. You can see we've got a flex parent here, and as we get smaller, it will snap down, and then once we get to medium screen sizes, they'll try to share equal size. The other thing is when we click inside here, you're going to notice we've got this floating label. We're going to use something called peer in Tailwind to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to come over here. First of all, maybe let's get a little bit zoomed in here, and I'll say section, and this is going to be aria labeled by, and we're going to label this by something called contact, and that will be an ID in the form. Now this itself will be a container, and then we'll do margin left and right auto, and then padding left and right of 8, and overflow hidden. We'll have overflow hidden because we're going to have some positioned absolute things that we want to kind of cut off with the section itself. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to have a flex parent, and that will actually be a div inside of here. So let's say flex, and then we need flex wrap as well, so it wraps on mobile. Justify center, so it keeps everything to the middle. Then we'll have a gap naturally of 12. When we get to medium screen sizes, we'll change that to 6. And when we get to large screen sizes, we will change this to 20. So we'll have two items in here. The first will be a div, and the second a form. So first of all, let's have a div here with a class of medium. On medium, it's going to try to flex to share equal width with its sibling. And then we'll set a max width as well. So on medium screens, we'll say max width small. And then this also needs to be relative because we're going to have some position absolute things inside of it. Now, before we do too much, let's actually add the form itself as well. Because this will be a little bit more complex, let's just expand this out, and I'm going to add these classes like we've done up above where it's a little easier to read, hopefully. So this also needs to be position relative. We're going to have some dots that show up on the right on large screen sizes relative to this container. This needs to be border of 8, and then we'll also have a border color here, neutral of 800. Actually, let's make this 900. And then we'll have some padding here of 6, rounded, large. And then as you can see here on this finished version, this is a grid parent. So we're going to space all these things out by the grid gap. So I'll say grid, and then I want a gap of 8. And then on medium screen sizes, like we did on its sibling here, we want it to try to share equal width with that sibling up above. Next, on medium screen sizes, I also want to set a max width of large. And then I want padding up and down, or margin up and down rather. Default will be 4. When we get to medium screen sizes, we will go to 12. When we get to large screen sizes, we will go to 16. And I think that's all we have to do. All right. Next, I want a background color of white here, so background white. And again, we're going to have dots that show up in the back. And if this doesn't have a background color, it'll just be transparent, and you'll kind of see those poking through the form. Once I get to dark, though, I do want to change this to background of neutral, and then we're looking at 800. Finally, I want to set this to a width of full, so it tries to take up the full width, and obviously it'll be capped by these right here, but that'll help it spread out all the way. All right, so let's see what we've done. So I'll save this and come down here, and there you go. And when we get to larger screen sizes, it should snap next to each other, and that's what it does. All right, so there are two things we need to do. We need to finish the form, and we need to finish this upper section right here. So let's start with the upper section, and I've got a few things in there. I've got an image to start with. And this is going to be my lamp image. So we'll call this lamp. And just to keep everything in the center here, I need to add margin left and right of auto. All right, so perfect. That's as we'd expect. The next thing I need to do is copy this button down. And I'm just noticing this says download the app. So that shouldn't do that. We do want this one that has the SVG up top because we're going to basically mimic those styles. So let's go ahead and copy this down, and then let's fix the other one while we're at it. So this should say sign up. Okay, so let's come back down this way, and just below this image, we'll paste in that other button from up above, and there it shows. And we're going to need to add a few things or change a few things around here. So first of all, I need to set a max width on this. So we'll do a width of max. So we only let it get as wide as it gets. Once we have other things added to this container, it's going to stretch itself out. And so I want it to stay only at the size it needs to take up. Next, by default, I actually don't want it to have a margin up and down. I just want it to have a margin up to keep it away from that lamp. And then once we get to medium screen sizes, I'll add back in that margin 12. Otherwise, when they separate, you can see there was a big gap there, and I only really want that to show up when I need it to, which is when I'm going to have those images show up down below. Other than that, I think all that button will stay the same. So let's come down here and add our final things we need. So we're going to have our image, which is our app. So let's come in here and look at our app. We'll call this app. Because this is an SVG, let's go ahead and set a width on here so it loads in at 240. And then for our class, by default, I'm going to hide it on mobile because I don't need it to show. It'll kind of be weird behind that form. Oops, hidden like that. And then once we get to a medium size, I'll change it to block. Now this will have a drop shadow on it. And I'm doing a drop shadow instead of a box shadow because it's an SVG and it has a box around it. If I did just normal shadow, that's a box shadow. And so actually, let me show you what that looks like. So if I come in here, I don't know if you can see that. Let me give this a little bit more space. So I'll say margin bottom like 24 or something. All right, so now if I come in here, you can see I've got this little ring showing up around that. Maybe you can see that. I try to zoom in and it takes me off that media query. So here we go right here. You see that right there? That's because it's got a box around it, and PNGs will have that as well. Anything with transparency like that, if you use a box shadow, it will give you that. Whereas if you use a drop shadow, it should work correctly. So let's scale this back out. All right, here we are back up here. So we're going to change this to a drop shadow XL. And then this does need to be positioned absolute. And I want it just to be over halfway. So I'll say left 1/2, and then I'm going to translate it negative 1/2 as well, back its own direction. Now let's go ahead and cap the size, how big this needs to be. And what I want is something around 16 rem. And you can't really see this, so let me give us a little bit more space. But if I were to come in here and try to find that size, so max width, and I look for something 16 rem, the smallest I've got is this 20 rem. Well, here's one of the ways that you can actually customize it. Like I mentioned up above, we could just hard code it like this. Once you start doing this all throughout the site, though, you're creating a lot of extra work for yourself in the future. So let's go ahead and create our own custom max width size of 16. And the way we're going to do that is to change the Tailwind config file. If I jump over here to the docs, you'll see that we've got our max width pulled up. And if I come down here, it tells you how to customize the theme. Now, to customize an existing thing, we would use it just inside the theme like they show here. So they're saying 1/2, just make that 50%. In our case, what we actually want to do is extend the theme. So I'm going to copy this out right here. And then inside this extend, we'll change this and we'll add this as 16. And this will be 16 rem. So to show you that, we'll jump over this way. And now max width 16 should give us 16 rem. And in fact, if I hover over this, IntelliSense is going to pick that up and know exactly what it's doing as well. Now here's the trouble. If I were to change this and put this into the theme, I'm actually overriding all the other defaults. And I also need a comma here. And so if I were to come back in here and like try to change this to something else, so let's say I said max width, the only max width available is 16 because I've just erased all the other ones. So basically, if you're overwriting an existing one, put it inside the theme. If you are extending it, so adding additional ones, put it inside the extend. All right, so let's come back up this way. That's an important distinction to note. When I get to extra large screen sizes, I do want to change this to my max width of extra small. All right, let me come down here, and I think that should be good. The last thing we need to do is add our circle, and it's going to be really hard to see any of this because it's going to be down here. So maybe let's do this. Let's finish the form and then come back and do the circle so that we can actually see what we're doing. So inside this form, we're going to have a few things. Well, first of all, have that H2 with the class of contact or an ID of contact. That's what the section points to itself. This is going to have some classes on it. So we'll have text 3XL and font bold. And this will say, let's connect. Now, when we look at these labels here, these floating labels, what we're going to do is have the input, and then we'll have the label after it, and those will both be wrapped in a container with a class of relative on it. And that way we can position this label absolute in reference to that relative container. So let's come in here and let's first of all have a container here with a relative, and then I'll have an input type of text, and then below this I'll have a label. Now this label 4 is going to point to the input ID. So let's give this something like name, and I'll come up here and give this an ID of name. And then let's switch back over here so we can see what's going on. So there it is right there. Now when it comes to this Tailwind form plugin we used, we can basically reference any of these types by just adding form input, and this will give us more control over it and just give us some good defaults. So I'm going to come back over here and say class on this input, and let's give this a class of form input. Hey, this is Chris from the future here. I just realized that you don't technically need to add this class. Basically, that plugin will automatically apply the styles, but you can add the form input class to like a div if it needs to look like a form input. So it'll basically apply the styles that are already going to be automatically applied to this input. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything, but just so you know. Now let's go ahead and style this input just a little bit, and then I'll style the label a little bit, and then we'll talk about how we're going to do that floating thing. So to start with, I want this to have a width of full because by default those inputs don't, and now you can see it stretches all the way across. Let's give this a border of 4, and then I'll color the border as border amber 400, and then rounded of medium, and let's scroll down here. I'm going to add a focus. On focus I want a ring of 2, and on focus I also want that ring offset to be 2. And then I need to change the border, the default border color on this form input. So we'll say border amber 400 when we're in focus. And then I don't want an outline on it, so I'll say outline of none. Now in dark, I want to change the background of the form input itself to 400. And I want to change the text back to basically my default, which is 900. You might remember that the whole body changes to a lighter color, but since I'm going to have the background of the form itself or the input itself be yellow, I don't want that to change. So let's do that, and then let me come over here and change my machine to dark mode, and let's just make sure that looks correct. So there you go, and everything's showing as expected. I am seeing that the ring color never came through, so let's copy this up and change this to ring amber 400. There you go. Okay, so we've got that little white circle, and if I switch over, there we go. So that's how it looks on light mode. Okay, cool. So we should be set there. In fact, maybe let's do this. Let's only have this focus be on dark mode, because I kind of like it just expanding a little bit on a light mode. I think that's easy enough to see, hopefully. Ring 4 maybe. There you go. So that's definitely easy enough to see. Let's leave it like that. And then if I switch to dark mode, there we go. All right, great. So we've got that set. Let's go ahead and start styling the label a little bit, and then I'll come back and we'll adjust some things. We need to get these things to float properly. And I'm going to start with text neutral 500. That's the default color I want it to take, and I do need to give this something, so like your name, so we can actually see it. And I'll scroll down here to give us a little more room. I want the text to be small, font to be bold, and then I want it to be uppercase. Now, I do need to position this absolutely, so let's go ahead and do that. And what we're going to do is start by positioning this as if it's already up above the form. Then we'll only show it in the input box when the placeholder is shown. That doesn't make sense. I think it will as we move. So I'm going to say, first of all, I want the top to be -4, and then I want left of 2. And then I'm also going to translate it y 1/2. So let's do that, -1/2. Now, the reason I'm doing it like that is because I'm going to end up putting this in the top 50% down and then translate it up 1/2. So I might as well just do that to start with, and then I don't have to kind of be playing with that translate value as well. All right, now how do we get these things to float properly? Well, what we're actually going to do is use a placeholder on this input. So let's add a placeholder first of all. So I'll say placeholder, your name, and right now it should show, but I actually want to hide that. So let's come in here and say placeholder, and then there's a transparent color. So I'm just going to basically hide it from the UI, although it still is there. Now to connect these two, I can basically connect siblings, the first to the one that follows it with the class of peer. So I'm going to come in here and say peer. And then what I can do is on its sibling, the next element, what I can do is say peer dash, and then I've got everything available to me essentially. So I can say whenever it's focused, I want the text to be blue 400. So now if I come in here and I focus, this text changes to 400. So by using this peer class and then using a peer dash, whatever the state is, I can change how things look. So let's add all of our peer classes down below here. we're going to have two different things we're focused on, the focus and whether or not the placeholder is being shown. So let's start with the placeholder. So I'll say pure placeholder shown. And when it's shown, I want it to go left 4 instead of left 2. And then let's copy this down because I also want it to go top 1/2. And it's showing right where it should show. When I click in here though, and I start to type, it's going to move up above because the placeholder is no longer shown. Now let's make that a little smoother. I'm going to come up here and say transition all. And now that should be a little smoother. If I come in here and start typing, it moves up. Cool. All right, so what else do we want to do here? Well, let's also change the color of the text. So whenever it's shown, I want the text neutral to be 900. So I want it to be that dark color. And then when I start to type and move it up, it'll change to a grayer color. I mentioned there were two states we were interested in, this placeholder shown, and the other one will be focus, because actually when I click in here, I want it to move up as well. So here I'll say pure focus, and I'll say negative top 4, and then pure focus, left of 2. I'm putting this back to the default states up here. Now you might think you could just get rid of these here, but then if I were to click and add stuff and then pull out of that box, now it's not focused and the placeholder is not showing, so it doesn't know what to do, so it just throws it over here. So I actually need that to be in there as well as the default. All right, next let's also change the text color. So I'm going to say text neutral of 600. And then I need to actually change this on dark mode because that will not be light enough. So let's add a dark in front of this and change this to 300. So here I'm stacking up the different media queries. So on dark mode, when the pure is focused, then change the text to neutral. And if we've done all this correctly, when I click in here, it should pull right up. And if I switch over to dark mode, everything should also look correct and it changes to that lighter color. Okay, cool. So we've got that set and ready to go. Let's change back to light mode. And now I'm going to go ahead and copy this down and I'm going to change a few things. Basically just the type to email, and then I'll change the ID to email as well. I'll change this to say your email. And then I also need to change this to email and this to email. All right, so now we've got two things and they should both work the same. Now the next area is actually an input. Now the next area is a text area. So I'll give this a name of like content or something like that, and the same thing for the ID. And then let's change this to 20 and 5 just to make it a little bit smaller. Then I will have a label here as well, and this will point to content as well. And a lot of this can be the same, so let's copy this up right here. And I'm going to add that to this. So class. And then let's go ahead and copy the styles as well. Here we're going to have to change around a couple things, but most of it will be fairly similar. So I'll add a class here as well. And then this needs a placeholder. And this will say, how can we help? All right, and I'm going to copy this because that needs to be our content of our label here. Okay, so that should show. Did I change the wrong one? Oh, no, I didn't. I just need to adjust these styles here. Okay, so let's leave those alone for now. First thing I need to do is change this form input to form text area. And then by default, you can resize text areas, and I don't want to allow for that. So I'm going to say resize none. And that should hide that little icon and not let them resize it. And then let me come down this way. And by default, I want to change this to top of 3. And then this 1/2 needs to be changed to 6. And I see one of our problems. We didn't wrap this in a relative div. So let's do that. Let's grab both of these. And if you hit Command-Shift-P in VS Code, there's a wrap with abbreviation. And I'll just say .relative. And I should wrap that. Okay, cool. So now it shows up down there. When I click in here, it pulls up above. I think all of that looks correct. All right, now let's go ahead and add our button down here. And let's grab this sign up button. So sign up. Here we go. So let's grab this right here. See, this is our green button from the menu. That'll still work. I think it's the exact same. Okay, so let's come down here and below this div, the relative div, let's add that sign up, and there it is down there. So there's a couple things we'll need to change here. First of all, I want this to be my neutral of 900. And then I want to set this to be a width of max. So it only takes up the size that it actually needs. All right, cool. Now if I come in here, so we kind of get this funky background shadow or background color. So let's change this to white. So if I come over here and, let's come back down here. There we go. So that's white. And then for dark mode, let's see how we might want to style this. Does that look okay? I mean, it's kind of intense. Maybe let's change this back to the amber. And let's see, we don't need 400 on the white. So I'll say dark, we need ring offset amber. Yeah, that looks okay. All right, cool. So we've got that set and ready to go. Now, if I come over here, I do have this, but I don't have the circle behind it. So let's go ahead and switch back to light mode, and let's go ahead and find that circle up above. So here it is. If I come all the way up here, let's go ahead and just copy this down. So let's grab that. We're going to come inside the first div here. We've got our image. We've got our link. We've got our SVG. We've got our image of the app. Let's paste it in just below that. Okay, so there it is there. We just need to change around a couple things. I'm going to change this to bottom of 18 first of all. And then rather than setting it to the right, I'm just going to set it left 1/2, which also means we need to translate it. And we do -1/2. And then I'm just going to adjust for the size. So we're going to say it needs to be width of 72. And then on large, it needs to stay at 96. And we'll just get rid of it on extra large. All right, I think all the rest of that is set and ready to go. There it is on large. We get down to the small screen sizes. We've got this nice little floating thing. I'm going to call that project done. Well, I hope this was a big help to you, and it showed you kind of how you can get started with Tailwind, gave you some more complex examples, and showed you how to customize the Tailwind config. If you have any questions or if I can be a help, please feel free to leave a comment below. Of course, I'd appreciate a like. That'll help the video get out to more viewers, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Happy coding.